The Labour Party and the Conservatives have unveiled their election health policies. David Cameron pledged to meet NHS funding needs in full if the Conservatives win, with an extra £8 billion by 2020. But Ed Miliband accused his rivals of trying to fund the NHS on an IOU, with no clear details on how they would pay for it. Labour are pledging £2.5 billion a year. They say will be partly funded by a mansion tax. Fatima Manji reports.
How many midwives does it take to help Ed Miliband get the perfect NHS selfie? It's a somewhat newer style of photo op to add to the usual well-worn hospital tour by political leaders. There's the usual cooing at babies and earnest talking to staff. Mr Miliband did that at Airedale General Hospital this morning. Meanwhile, 200 miles south, Mr Cameron was performing similar duties in Witney, as the Conservatives announced they would commit to funding the NHS an extra £8 billion by 2020.
We're able to fund the NHS's own plan in full because we have a strong economy that's linked to the difficult and long-term decisions that we've taken elsewhere.
The Liberal Democrats have said they too will meet this £8 billion funding, and they'll pay for it by restricting some tax reliefs. But back in Yorkshire, as Labour launched their health manifesto and said they'd do whatever it takes to fund the NHS, they wouldn't commit to the £8 billion figure.
Given that the Conservatives and the Lib Dems are making very clear commitments on NHS funding, hasn't your apparent plan to weaponise the NHS as an election tactic actually backfired?
The Conservatives want to talk about the NHS and who is going to do the right thing for the NHS every day between now and the general election. I say bring it on. Because we've seen 5 years of broken promises from David Cameron. This is a guy who said in January, he said unfunded promises are the thing that is going to destroy the NHS. Right? What is he doing today? A totally unfunded promise. No idea where the money's coming from. Not a single penny.
Labour have promised to spend an extra £2.5 billion a year on the NHS, which they say will be funded by a mansion tax. Their big health pledge is 3,000 more midwives and making sure that every mother has one-to-one care with an individual. Their big health pledge is 3,000 more midwives and making sure that every mother has one-to-one care with an individual midwife during childbirth. Claire Harbottle welcomes Labour's pledge but says it's also fraught with possible dangers.
The problem with promising one-to-one care during a woman's birthing is that the pressure on other areas of the service that don't have a minimum staffing ratio at the moment and aren't being promised one will be put under more pressure.
Are you saying that you can see a situation where a woman is well supported during the birth process but then suffers afterwards because midwives are being pulled off postnatal care, for instance?
Yes.
It's one example of just how complex solving a problem in the NHS is. Meanwhile, UKIP's Nigel Farage is pledging £3 billion a year for the NHS and poured scorn over the Labour-Tory funding battle.
Suddenly overnight, we start seeing almost a game of poker developing, where whatever one party says, another party raises it. It's all well and good to talk about an extra £8 billion by 2020, but there's been absolutely no suggestion provided of where the money's going to come from.
But the Conservatives know the NHS has been a traditional strength for Labour, so can they win over the trust of the voters on this?
I'm not sure who I'd trust, but I do like that the Lib Dems are bringing attention towards mental health issues, which I think the other parties have kind of escaped talking about so far.
I don't think the Conservatives are very clear on what they're ring fencing and what they're not. And I don't think Labour are either, but I feel like they are a bit more trustworthy on the NHS.
I think overall I'll still trust Conservatives more, but I think Labour has said a lot more about the NHS in general.
Do you trust any of them when it comes to the NHS?
It's hard because they always promise one thing and then when whoever gets in power seems to do the opposite.
Labour are now under pressure to fully match the Tory NHS spending pledge. So far, Ed Miliband has refused to do so. One thing's for certain, the NHS very much remains a political football.